Good morning, James.
Morning, my love. Anything I can do?
Not at all.
Almost ready. Perfect. See you later, sweetie.
Bye-bye.
I forget my own head.
Oh, oh, James, not again.
James, the appointment was today.
Oh, uh-oh. James, is everything all right?
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. You know, they say every good thing has its season. And sometimes, just when life feels the most complete, something begins to change. Quietly. So quietly you almost miss it. Today, I want to tell you about the moment Diep realized that the person she trusted most had been carrying a secret. Not to hurt her, but because he loved her. Let's take this one step at a time. Now, I want you to picture this. A perfectly ordinary morning. James is getting ready for work. Diep is making breakfast. Nukday is somewhere in the house, being 6 years old. And then Diep opens the refrigerator, and there are James's keys, sitting right next to the orange juice. She picks them up, holds them out, and they both laugh. I'd forget my own head, James says. And that is that. She thinks nothing of it. We all have those mornings. We all put things in the wrong place when our minds are somewhere else. That is just life. But then he misses a dentist appointment. He had written it on the calendar himself, in red pen, in his own handwriting. He forgets it anyway. Then comes the evening at dinner that Diep thinks about for a long time afterward. Nige is telling a story about something that happened at school. One of those long, winding stories that only a 6-year-old can tell. James is listening, or so it seems. Then he turns to her and says the wrong name. Diep looks up from her bowl. He corrects himself, smiles, keeps eating. It happens again 10 minutes later, and once more before bedtime. That night, after Nai is asleep, Diep lies in the dark and stares at the ceiling. She does not say anything. She just thinks. She tells herself it is tiredness, long hours, stress. She tells herself this for 6 weeks. Then one Saturday morning, she walks into the kitchen and stops. James is standing at the counter, holding his coffee mug. Just standing there, staring at it. Like he has forgotten what it is for. James? He looks up, smiles that easy smile she has loved for 10 years. Sorry, miles away. You feeling all right? Fine, just tired. He pours his coffee and goes to sit down with the newspaper. Diep stays in the doorway. Now, I want you to understand something. When you have known someone for 10 years, you know every version of tired they have. You know the tired after a long work week, the tired after a sleepless night with a sick child, the tired that a good Sunday rest will fix. This was not any of those. This was something else entirely. The following Tuesday, Diep picks up the phone and calls Margaret. Nai is at school. James is at work. The house is quiet. Margaret picks up on the second ring. Diep! How lovely, dear. How is everyone? Everyone is well, thank you. A pause. Margaret, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be straight with me. Silence. Not the silence of surprise. The silence of someone who has been waiting for this call. It's James, Margaret says softly. And Diep knows right then. She sits down at the kitchen table. You already know. I've known since spring. Spring, 4 months ago. He made me promise, Margaret says carefully. He said he needed more time. He didn't want to frighten you before he was absolutely certain. Certain of what, Margaret? Please, tell me plainly. A long pause on the other end. Early onset, Margaret says. The doctors confirmed it in February. He went back a second time, hoping they had made a mistake. They had not made a mistake. Diep sits at that kitchen table for a good long while after she hangs up. She looks around the room. At James's coffee mug still sitting on the counter from that morning, at Nee's drawing on the refrigerator, all four of them holding hands. Her mother included, everyone smiling. She does not cry right away. She just sits there and lets it settle, the way you have to sometimes, when something is too big to take in all at once. James comes home at 6 o'clock. He is carrying groceries. He remembered every single thing she asked for that morning. Every item, not one forgotten. He smiles when he sees her. Something smells good in here. I made soup. Perfect. So he kisses her cheek. Where's Nahe? I asked Mom to keep her tonight. And he goes still, just for a moment, just long enough. He knows that she knows. They sit down to dinner. The soup is too hot. They wait for it to cool. Outside, the neighborhood is quiet. Just an ordinary evening to anyone passing by. How long? Diep says. James sets his spoon down very carefully. About a year ago is when I first noticed, he says. I thought it was stress. Then one day I ran into an old friend, someone I had known for 15 years. He stops. I could not remember his name, not even close. And you went to the doctor. February. 8 months ago. Diep looks at this man across the table from her. The man who waited at the bus station when she came back from Hatay. Who said I'm proud of you more times than she could count. Who never once made her feel alone. Why didn't you tell me? He is quiet for a moment. Because I didn't want to see your face do what it's doing right now. Diep realizes her hands are shaking. She puts them in her lap. I kept waiting for the right time, he says. And then I thought, if I just made a plan first, figured things out, so you wouldn't have to be scared before there was something real to be scared of. Diep is very still. You were deciding, she says slowly, what I could and couldn't handle. Chena, he looks at her. Without asking me, she says. She has said those exact words before. To her mother, in Hatay, standing by a kitchen window on the hardest afternoon of her life. She did not expect to need them again so soon. Are you angry? James asks. Yes, that's fair. I'm also scared. So am I, he says quietly. I've been scared since February. She reaches across the table and takes his hand. He holds on tight. The soup goes cold. They stay at the table anyway. Here's what I learned that night. The people who love us most, they are often the ones who try the hardest to protect us from hard news. And I understand that. I truly do. But here is what I believe. A burden shared is a burden made lighter. James spent 8 long months carrying something that was never meant to be carried alone. Diep did not forgive him for that right away. But she did not let go of his hand either. And sometimes, when the news is heavy and the room feels very dark, that is the most important thing. You hold on, you face it together, one day at a time. In the weeks after that dinner, James becomes very busy, not with work, with other things. Diep notices him at the desk late at night. Long after she and Nai have gone to bed, papers spread out in front of him. His reading glasses on, writing things down in that careful, deliberate way of his. She does not ask right away. She gives him time. Then one evening, he calls her to the desk and sits her down. I want to go through some things with you, he says, and he walks her through everything. The bank accounts, the insurance, the documents for the house, a folder for Nie's school records, a list of phone numbers, the doctor, the lawyer, Margaret, Mrs. Lan, everything labeled, everything organized, everything she would need. Diep sits beside him and listens carefully. She does not cry, not yet. At the back of the folder, she finds an envelope. Her name is written on the front, in James's handwriting. Not yet, he says gently. That one is for later, when you need it. She puts it back. She does not ask when later is. The following Sunday, his mother comes to visit. Margaret sits at the kitchen table with Diep, while James takes Nye to the park down the street. They watch them through the window. James pushing Nye on the swing, Noog's head thrown back, laughing at the sky. He was up until midnight last week, Diep says, getting everything in order. I know, Margaret says. He called me, asked me to check it over. Ha, Tsasu. Diep wraps both hands around her tea. He's more worried about us than about himself, she says. He always has been. Margaret is quiet for a moment. That is simply who he is. They watch him push the swing again. Higher this time. Nye shrieks with delight. Diep thinks, I want to remember this. Exactly this. The light through the window and Nye's voice and James standing there in his old green jacket. She burns it into her memory like a photograph. Now, I want to tell you about a Tuesday morning about a month later. Nothing special about this morning, on the surface. Diep is in the kitchen making breakfast. Noise is getting ready for school. James comes downstairs, dressed for work. He pours himself coffee. He sits at the table. And then he looks at Diep and says, very casually, very normally, Is Nye up yet? Diep turns from the stove. She's getting dressed, she says. Good. We don't want her to be late. And he picks up his coffee and looks out the window. Nothing strange about any of that, except Nye had come downstairs 10 minutes earlier and talked to James for a full 5 minutes. He had smiled, answered her questions, told her to go get her backpack, and now he had no memory of it at all. Diep turns back to the stove. She stirs something that does not need stirring. She keeps her face very still until she is sure she can. That afternoon, after Nye is at school and James is at work, Diep sits in the kitchen with the unfolder. She takes out the envelope. She knows he said later, but she needs it now. She opens it carefully. Inside is a single piece of paper, handwritten. Both sides. She reads it slowly. He writes about the day they met, about the first time he understood, really understood, that this was the woman he would spend his life with. He writes about the morning Nye was born and how he stood in that hospital hallway and felt like his whole chest had been rearranged. He writes about Ha-Te, about watching Diep walk up to that yellow door and knock, about how proud he was. So proud he had to look away for a moment so she wouldn't see him cry. He writes, I know what is coming, and I need you to know that I am not afraid. I am only sorry that I will not be able to hold on to every part of you the way I want to, but please know, whatever I forget, whatever I lose, the feeling will still be there. It just may not have your name on it anymore, and that is not the same as not loving you. It will never be the same as not loving you. He writes, take care of Nye. Take care of your mother. Let Margaret help you. And please, do not spend too long being sad for me. You have a whole life still to live. I need you to live it. He signs it simply. James. Diep sits at that kitchen table for a long time. She reads it once, then again, and on the third time, she cannot hold it anymore. She puts her face in her hands, and she cries the way you cry when something is just too big and too heavy, and you have been holding yourself together for so long that your arms simply give out. She cries for the man who organized her whole life into a folder while she was sleeping, who stayed up past midnight making sure she would be all right, who wrote 2 sides of a letter instead of saying, I am scared, I am losing myself. Please don't let go of me. Because even now, even in this, he was thinking of her first. She cries until there is nothing left. And then she folds the letter carefully, puts it back in the envelope, and tucks it into the very back of the folder where he placed it. That evening, James comes home and she has dinner on the table. He smiles when he walks in, kisses her cheek. Something smells wonderful. "Sit down," she says. "It's almost ready." And they have dinner together. The three of them. Nye talks without stopping, the way she always does. James laughs in the right places. It is a perfectly ordinary evening. Diep watches him across the table and thinks, "I am going to love you for every day of this, however it looks, whatever it becomes, every single day." Here's what I learned from James's letter. The greatest thing one person can do for another is to think of them, truly think of them, even when they themselves are the one who is hurting. James was facing something most of us cannot imagine. And still, his first thought was her. Diep did not know how to repay that kind of love. So she did the only thing she could. She stayed. She showed up every morning. She held on. And she lived the life he asked her to live, one day at a time.